Hello, everyone. My name is Candace. This is my sign name. I am from the Ojibwe First Nations, that is in the territory of the Pine Creek people. I want to introduce our speakers this evening. We have Shauna Joint. She's having some technical issues, so I'm going to do her introduction. She is from Trondek-Hewichin First Nation, and this is in Dawson City, Yukon. Hello. We also have Paula McDonald. Hello. My name is Paula McDonald, and I'm the representative for the Deaf Youth Canada. I'm the communications director. I'm here for technical support this evening. Thank you. Thank you, Paula. We'd also like to introduce Wissam Constantine. And Wissam will start us off this evening with a land acknowledgement. Thank you, Candace. Thank you for participating this evening. I'd like to begin with the land acknowledgement. Canadian Association of the Deaf's offices is located in Ottawa, Ontario, and this is a territory and unceded lands of the Algonquin, Anishinaabe people. CAD would also like to recognize all Indigenous people across Canada, from the Mi'kmaq in the East Coast, all the way to the Salish in the West Coast, and to the Northern Territory, to the Inuit peoples. We would like to recognize that we live, work, and play on their territory. Personally, I'm situated in London, Ontario, and this is where many First Nations or Indigenous people have lived for many generations. And this is considered the Thames territory. We'd like to acknowledge and thank them for the land where we live, work, and play. Thank them for the water, the land, and the animals that we enjoy. Thank you, Miigwech. Thank you, Wissam. Shauna was going to start us off with an opening prayer. Paula saying, just give us a moment. We're having some technical issues. Shall we proceed with the opening prayer? I apologize, everyone. We're having some technical issues. Great job, Annette. I hope everyone can see. Hello. I would like to offer a prayer for the ability to work together, support each other, and respect each other. Blessings across Canada for the recovery of missing children's bodies being found. Bless their innocent souls. They have time to be released from here and return to the Creator. Their souls can rest in peace now. Bless you all. Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Chimugwech. Thank you, Shauna, for your prayer. Now I'd like to talk about tonight's discussion, Murdered Missing Women Indigenous to Spirit. We have something we'd like to share. Just give us a moment.
Shauna's video was really choppy.
In 2013, we had 1,181 cases of missing murdered Indigenous women and girls. As of April 2015, 174 have been missing for longer than 30 days. That's over a time period of a month. We have 174 who've gone missing. In 2016, 5,712 cases of women and girls have gone missing. Those numbers are not exact numbers. It's believed that there are far more still, and the numbers continue to grow. There's no exact numbers. And honestly, the police have not investigated all of the reports. Some reports are made, and those reports are not documented. Some reports are made, and the police are not pursuing the search for those murdered missing Indigenous women and girls. I don't know if you can see this graph. It highlights the number of people that have gone missing from 1960 to 1990. You can see how it's been divided between the ages of under 18 and over 18. This represents all ages. These are women and girls that have gone missing or have been taken. We'll be sharing a list of the names of over 250 missing women and girls. You can see their images and their names. Alongside their names, where it's blank, it signifies that they're still missing. If it's highlighted in yellow, it means their cases have not been resolved. If it's highlighted in red, that means their cases have been resolved, they have been found. We ask for a moment of silence to recognize the women and girls who've gone missing. We'll be scrolling through and we ask for that moment of silence. Thank you.
As you've seen the number of names listed, the names go far beyond what we see here. I have family members whose names are listed, and I wasn't aware of that. I just had that realization. And when we look through those names, please remember that there's a number more who aren't listed. And we wanted you to acknowledge them and remember them. And we're still continuing the fight to find them, to find their remains. We won't give up. We want to be able to put them to peace. And it's heart-wrenching. Moving on. I would like to introduce the next image, which is called the Highway of Tears in northern British Columbia. In the Prince Rupert, all the way to the Prince George area. It's a very famous trucker highway. This road is used to bring goods across the province throughout this highway, and it is quite a barren area. There are no businesses along the highway. There are no residences. A number of individuals frequent the highway and hitchhike in order to travel from one area to the next. And what we're seeing is a number of Indigenous women have gone missing or have ended up being murdered while traveling along that highway. And it's not just solely Indigenous women, but Caucasian women as well. But for some reason, the Caucasian women seem to be found and investigations are pursued, but this isn't the case for the Indigenous women. And I wanted to show the image. Murders do take place across Canada, but the numbers, the surgence of numbers are quite high in British Columbia in those northern regions. As you can see here on the map, the area from Prince George to Prince Rupert, where this highway sits, it is still not a safe area to travel to this day. And you can see the cities along the town of Indigenous territories. And you may question why these are occurring. These are areas in which there's high drug use, there's abuse. There's not a lot to do in these northern communities. And unfortunately, we've lost so many Indigenous persons. They really lack the supports that they deserve. Not a lot of individuals own vehicles or homes. And I guess Caucasian people see them as victims, and these individuals are raped and murdered as a result of that. I also wanted to add as well that in that northern region, the rates of crime are very high because of the lack of police activity. And in fact, police services just simply don't care about those regions. It's a quiet area. The closest city is Vancouver, which is, a number of hours, quite a distance south of that. I wanted to proceed on to the next slide. Indigenous people are always asking and trying to understand why there is so much hatred brought upon us and toward us. We are humans like everyone else. We have feelings like everyone else. We are made of red blood, the same as everyone else. We're no different. February 10th, 2021, the CBC announced a national project, which is supported with federal funding, to honor the memory of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls through the expression of art, whether it be sculpting, photography, and other forms of visual art. This is an example of the red dress hanging on the tree, and this symbolizes the blood of the Indigenous women, women who have been raped and murdered. And the symbolism of the red dress is to indicate the blood shed. We continue to march, we continue to protest for equal and fair treatment and justice. We need these issues to be addressed. We need the lens on these issues, and we're going to continue to fight. We will not give up. And as you can see again, rallies, and they're still taking place. We have been rallying and protesting and marching since the 1960s. And this still takes place today. And the government continues to resist and ignore us. We're starting to see some doors opening up, and they're beginning to listen. But with the residential schools and the discovery of the 215 bodies of the children's unmarked graves, that's where attention started to draw additional attention, and more voices were heard. Indigenous people have been fighting for equal rights and justice, and we do so on a daily basis. If you have any questions for us, if you would like to have a discussion.
Thank you, Candace. I do want to open it up to the audience, but I want to talk to you first about some technical processes. If you could type your question or comment in the Q&A or the chat. If you would rather ask your question with your camera on, please use the raise hand button, and I will spotlight you so that you can ask your question. But if you want to take some time to think about it, you can either use the Q&A, the chat feature, or raise your hand. But let's start with Daniel. And I'm going to just make sure I get Daniel. Hi, Daniel. Yes, hi. I have two questions. First of all, I want to ask about, I don't know if I'm saying it right, but Indigenous, murdered and missing Indigenous women. Were there any deaf or hard of hearing women who were missing? Candace speaking, yes, there has been a lot of research. We don't have exact numbers, but there were definitely deaf and hard of hearing women missing as well. Daniel speaking. And I'm wondering too, whether there were any men in that number. Were there any men from the LGBT community or any men in general missing as well? Candace speaking, yes, this is definitely true. There were LGBT people and men as well who were gone missing and who were murdered. Absolutely. And for example, there was a story in the Star. So there was a man traveling at night, following the stars in the darkness of night, and no. In the north, it's very cold. I can't hear you. So
The starlight trips where Indigenous men are taken by the police into remote locations. We'll share stories about that. Indigenous men definitely have gone missing. They were taken on starlight tours.
thank you. Okay, and who we have next? There is Lisa. You're asking the question, Hawkins, wonder about prayers. Are they related to Indigenous or Christian or both? Okay, well, I can answer that, but maybe one of the other panelists would like to answer. Okay, I'll answer the question. Every race has their own belief system, their own traditions, their own way of practicing spirituality. And our Indigenous peoples have their own ways of practicing spirituality and prayers as well. And we pray in general, and we do pray, yes, we do pray. And the way we pray is not necessarily to God, but to Creator. So we use different terminology when we pray, but it doesn't necessarily have to do with Christian prayers, just our prayers. All right, and there is a second question as well. No hands up? No, I do not believe there's any hands up. Let's ask the questions that are in the Q&A first. Okay, the next question is from Genevieve. And I don't know if I'm spelling your last name right. Genevieve Degear. And your question is, thank you very much for your courage to share this difficult information. I would like to know how us deaf and hard of hearing non-Indigenous can help with this issue. That is a really good question, Genevieve. Thank you for asking that. You can be involved in various ways by sharing what you've learned in webinars such as this one, or other webinars or other conversations that you have with Indigenous people. And if somebody who's non-Indigenous is giving you or sharing wrong information, you can correct them, and you can share correct information as you learn it. You can offer support to the different groups, like the Missing and Murdered Women and Girls group or LGBT groups. You can add your support. You can also get involved with homeless Indigenous people who are living on the street by giving to them and supporting them in different ways. So there's lots of ways non-Indigenous people can be involved. So there's so many different things, so many more than I'm saying even now, but yeah, there's lots of things. But the important thing to remember is if you don't know, get your information from an accurate source. And yeah, and Paula would like to add. Would it be okay if I added as well? Of course. So we know that in general, there are organizations who support programs. And for the first time, we now have an organization, and it's not just for deaf people, but we are setting up programs with the local regions across Canada. NWAC, let me try to think if I can think of it. This is National Women, what is it? National Women Indigenous, I can't remember the acronym, but it's a Canadian-wide national organization, but there are regions and provincial groups that are associated with it. And it is encouraged that those regional groups collaborate with one another so that you can become stronger and work together. Deaf and hard of hearing people, Indigenous people, if there's organizations that do exist, partner with them to become a stronger force. And if programs offer support and resources and services that can serve deaf and hard of hearing people, that is helpful, because starting from scratch can be very, very challenging. And Indigenous groups don't always have the resources, especially Indigenous deaf and hard of hearing groups. So if we have several groups that do have resources and then we work together, it is more effective. So it doesn't matter if you're hearing or deaf or Indigenous or non-Indigenous, just working together, providing information, sharing correct information, reporting, working together. So national organizations like CAD, if there is a region that doesn't have an organization that is going up and running, then talk to the national organization and try to get something going. This is one of the ways that we want to share information in webinars such as this. And you're always welcome to be part of our meetings and our webinars. The more people, the better. So it's really great to have people here. Thank you for coming. Candace speaking. I am part of an Indigenous committee that's working on a website. We're planning to design a new website, which will include information, resources, partnerships, collaborations that already exist, and sharing that. So we're working on that right now. So please be patient with us, and when it's ready, we'll let everybody know. But I agree with what Paul is saying, collaborations and partnerships are so important, and that's why we're starting these partnerships. That's why we're starting to get together more. Paula speaking. Also, I just want to read the next message from the chat. This is coming from, let's see here. I have a friend who belongs to a family group. There are elders, and this person doesn't have a lot of support. They grew up in the culture, but they were culturally deprived, and they didn't grow up understanding or being exposed to deaf culture. They went to the school for the deaf, but they still felt very disconnected from the deaf culture. They didn't feel like they belonged anywhere. A year later, they married to a hearing person, and they shared with their family. They weren't an Indigenous family, but they did connect and brought the kindly hearing husband who embraced her family and brought them together, even though he was not Indigenous. How can deaf Indigenous develop better connections with their people? Well, education is a lot better now. So there are so many different situations. There's an Indigenous Women's Association of Canada. That's one of the things I was going to mention as well. And somebody typed it in the chat, and that's so important. The resources are wonderful in that organization. Check it out. There are visuals, there are images, there are stories. It's I would really strongly encourage everyone to check out that website. And then let's go back to the one here asking deaf Indigenous people developing resources together. I agree. It's helpful to work together. Yes, working together is important. It doesn't always happen. For example, in my reserve, Pine Creek, there are 159 deaf Indigenous people who don't use sign language at all. They use the oral method of communication. So, but in fact, they do not have language. They are language deprived. They have cognitive ability, but they have no language. Their parents didn't want to send them to a school for the deaf because they wanted to keep them on the reserve and teach them the traditions of the Indigenous people, but they don't have language. So they didn't really know about deaf access or deaf culture or language, or the importance of living as a deaf person. They thought more importantly about living on the land. So they didn't have exposure to sign language. And so that's a big issue right now where I live. And personally, I am working on a personal project with deaf Indigenous children and adults and youth to partner with hearing organizations to step forward and develop. That's what we're working on this website for, to share resources and encourage partnerships with families, teaching their families how to use sign language to communicate with their children and team with others. So it's a big issue right now. Very good question. Paula speaking. Yes, there's a lot of work in developing resources which can be complex. So because Indigenous languages are not all the same, communication can be challenging. If you're part of the same nation, maybe you will have one language that you communicate with, but it's not always the same as another nation or another region. So sometimes nations don't have, or groups don't have access to sign language, so it can be challenging. And so there is a lot of work to do and a lot of collaboration, working with interpreters, working with hearing people, and so it is in a work in progress, and it's a long-term plan. So that people are comfortable communicating with each other, getting the Indigenous supports and knowledge, keeping and sharing information, but it's a big responsibility for all of us. Okay, there's another comment in the chat, somebody in our committee. It's already been commented on. There are a lot of connections with First Nations. A lot of similarities, and the elders deserve a lot of respect and going down the same pathway as hearing people who come from the Indigenous community. So we are now struggling with some of the things that the hearing Indigenous people have gone through before us. So I completely agree with that comment. And that person who commented was part of our committee, the Indigenous, there's an Indigenous specific deaf Indigenous committee. And they're looking at developing and designing a sign language that is not American Sign Language. It's an Indigenous sign language. And it's because ASL is its own language. This group is working on Indigenous languages that are native to Indigenous groups. And there is a strong tradition and culture within the deaf Indigenous people. There's a culture within the LGBT community. There's a culture within Two-Spirit community. There's a culture of fairness and equity. And if there is no sense of culture, then there cannot be equity. So when we teach deaf Indigenous culture, there is an embracing of equity and common support. And culture has to be, it has to be collaborative. It has to be full of embracing of each other, not bitterness and judgmental attitudes and a spirit of lesser than. You will see a big difference when that happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Candace. So we have another comment here from Lenore Vlug. Also, I believe that the Assembly of First Nations passed a resolution that mandated or required accessibility for Indigenous persons with disabilities and deaf who wish to participate in AFN assemblies and activities. Deaf Indigenous committee members could take this with the AFN and their provincial or territorial Indigenous Aboriginal organizations to do the same, to provide interpreters assistance for communication, etc. So yes, I have had experience working with the Assembly of First Nations. One of the issues is their budget that they've established. There is one. When it comes to sign language interpretation, the budget is quite small. So if you want to secure a sign language interpreter, you may not necessarily get those services. So we need to work together and to advocate for it. What I've learned is that this is just a recent thing that they've done. We partnered with them for the month of June. And so we need to build trust with them. We need to engage with them, and we will develop partnerships with them. That's what they would prefer. So that's the initial step that needs to take place. So I'm hoping we can make better relations with Assembly of First Nations. Candace, well, you have to remember as well that all of the First Nations have their band and council on the reservation, and they don't necessarily operate with the same laws that the rest of Canada does. For example, when it comes to Pine Creek Nation, my First Nation, it's very discriminatory against disabilities, against deaf. So even though they say they support access, it's only people who have physical disabilities, not necessarily deafness. So in high school, I wanted to participate in volleyball, and I went to band and council and asked for support, and I was turned down. My brother was amazing when it came to snowboarding. He asked for support and was not able to get it. There's not a lot of partnership happening between deaf and band and council, and I believe it's because we're missing that culture of acceptance. You know, it depends on who your chief is. Sometimes you get bad apples in band and council. So that's something you have to take a look at. You might wonder why we're not succeeding. It's because there's so many barriers. We're still fighting on these issues. Paula saying, yes, I agree. We have another comment. It says deaf communities can ask for support when it comes to communication. And yes, we've responded to that. It really depends where you're located. I see a few hands raised. So we have 2 more questions in the Q&A. Should we do the hands or the Q&A? Okay, we'll go with the hands first. Do you want to share your screen? If you could turn your camera on. Okay. I just wanted to add a comment to one of the comments was previously said. That when it comes to deafness and being Indigenous, that you feel an affiliation. Some of the issues are the same when it comes to deaf and Indigenous deaf, but for a long time, I thought when it came to different cultures and races within the deaf community, it didn't matter because it's deaf first. I always thought that way. For example, Sri Lankan countries and the Tamil, I forget what the sign is, but they've been at war. But when it comes to deaf individuals from those countries, they still have that affinity because they're deaf. So until last year, when the Black Lives Matter movement started, I don't know if you're familiar with Gallaudet University, but we learned that it's really dependent on who the former deaf leaders were, that there was a lot of racism in previous history, and Black deaf community members didn't feel part of the community. So that made me realize that I have to be careful and not make an assumption that being deaf means that you're automatically part of the community. So I imagine it's the same thing for deaf Indigenous. We experience a lot of the same things, but I'm not sure that non-Indigenous white deaf people would go murdered and missing in the same way. Yes, thank you for sharing that, Genevieve. Can you see me? Should I turn off my camera? No, you're welcome to keep it on if you'd like. It's Candace. Could I just add a comment? Thank you for sharing that. As a Native person myself, I tend to feel a little offended when a non-Indigenous person says, well, we're the same. And I don't think so, not necessarily. Yes, when it comes to deafness, and another deaf person, I don't care about their race. I do have that affinity, but I always get a lot of judgment because I'm Native. There's a well-known Indigenous person who, so a non-Indigenous person who is famous and looked up to, but when it comes to me, they look down on me. So when I want to get involved in different committees and things in the community, I'm not welcome to. In high school, the vice principal, who was a person of color, I got along with quite well, but at school, I was treated as a stranger, and it was because I was Native. So I've had those types of experiences. So being deaf doesn't necessarily mean that you're welcome within the deaf community. And I'm sure that others have had similar experiences. So we need to be careful and not make assumptions, right? Exactly. Thank you. We have another question. Well, I have a response. I don't know if you want to respond to Danielle's question. What causes women and girls to be murdered and go missing? Is it because it's a hate crime? What's the motivation? Well, I could give you an example. For if your mother went murdered and missing and that were to happen to you, you would go to the police and ask for help in investigating that. But if the police wouldn't do the investigation, how would you feel? You would experience loss and grief, and you would lose that motivation. That happens to our community as well. And we are the First Nation. We shared the land and the territory with newcomers, but we've been murdered and tried to be taken off the land. And we've had enough of that. And we've been quiet for a lot of years, and it's time now to bring attention to these issues. We want to have partnership with non-Indigenous people. We don't want to create division, and we want to have that partnership. That's all we're asking for, just for a little love. I hope that answers your question. Yes, if I could just add one more comment to that question. So I'm studying at university right now. I'm studying Indigenous studies. And one of the theories, and there's a lot of reasons about why this is taking place. But if you look back historically, thousands of years ago, and this doesn't apply to everyone, but the majority of the nations were led by Indigenous women. That was their role. These were matrilineal societies, and the women ran the communities and the men did the hunting. When the Europeans came to settle North America, they had a different society, and they didn't respect women as leaders. They preferred to engage with the men of Indigenous societies. So they established their European or Western way of thinking, where men were in roles of leadership. And that led them to feel more powerful. Men are more likely to engage in war than women. So that was the beginning of things, how things change for the Indigenous societies. Now, this didn't apply everywhere, but this is the concept, and that affected our Indigenous societies. And we're no longer at war now, and so different events are taking place. The Indigenous residential schools, the Christian and missionary schools, and we talked about bad apples. Bad apples happen everywhere. It doesn't matter what society you're from. And it depends, I guess, on some of their needs. I believe that priests, I'm not sure about all religions, but they are not allowed to marry. So because of their positions, they took advantage of the children. I imagine that was predominantly the girls, but I think it happened to boys as well. But Indigenous boys didn't talk about it maybe as necessarily as much as the girls did. But over time, after there were no more residential schools, this fed into the foster care system. And this has impacted the missing, murdered Indigenous women and girls as well. Well, some children went from foster care and went into homes that were abusive. And to this day, we still have this foster care system, and Indigenous children are the highest percentage in care. And even throughout that time, Indigenous women were being sterilized. And Indigenous women were targeted because we are the people that carry children and continue the communities and the culture. So to avoid increasing the numbers of Indigenous people, they would sterilize the women and kill them. Women are important to societies because that's how we procreate and continue to grow our communities. And so that historical fact has never stopped. It just continues on and on and on. Different modalities are taking place to stop us from continuing to be here on this earth. And that's part of the reason. If I could just add to that, to Paula's comment as well, she's right. I just wanted to expand just a little bit on something about the cycles, about why things are repeating. At the beginning, the nuns and the priests started abusing the Indigenous children and girls. It started with the young boys that were forced to do sexual acts for the priest, and those children had trauma and anger. They experienced rape, and then they perpetrated that on other Indigenous children, and that cycle continued. Even nuns raped young Indigenous girls, and some had sex with those young children and destroyed their sexual reproductive organs. So this cycle of abuse continued with the goal of reducing the number of Indigenous people. When you see an Indigenous person on the street, you see that they are abusing each other, but this is intergenerational trauma. You might see them drinking or doing drugs. It might be because of that intergenerational trauma. They were given drugs, alcohol from those priests or nuns. So I just wanted to add to that to give you a sense of why this is continuing today. You're right, it continues to happen. When it comes to sexual abuse and trauma, rape, verbal threats, there's abuse at domestic violence. It could be violence that take place at home, at the mall. This violence can happen anywhere. From all those images that we shared, you know, there were children as young as 2, all the way up through seniors. And some women manage to escape that domestic violence, but depending on where they are, if they're in a remote location, they may run into difficulty in the woods, and depending on the weather, they may perish from that. Some have been murdered and some have experienced abuse. They may find a safe place and then get abused again.
There's a lot of physical abuse, and there's a number of examples that we can speak to, but one in particular, it's my understanding among the Mohawk community, the Mohawk community around Southern Ontario. At the time, not necessarily the Canadian-US border, but it was at the time where you could travel freely. And a lot of Indigenous individuals were missing, when they were crossing the border. There was a high drug trade at the time. There was a sex trafficking at the time. Yes. So there's a number of examples that we can speak to that are currently still occurring. There's a wealth of information that we could share, but I guess we can go on to the next question, if that's okay. Yes, let's look at the next question. I'll take a look here. From Jonathan McDonald. Oh, sorry, we're switching LSQ interpreters. Shauna, I wanted to see if you wanted to chime in. Was there anything you wanted to add to? Nope, I'm okay. Okay, over to Jonathan's question. Thank you so much for being here to share this difficult information. I'm wondering how I can support deaf Indigenous students in my classroom and within the school community on this topic, especially that my classroom is in BC. Are there resources on deaf Indigenous people that we can go to, like the recently established website on BLM created by deaf Black people? Do we have resources? I guess I will allow my colleagues to respond. Shauna, are you able to answer that question? We'll just wait a minute for Shauna. I guess she's reading the question. Sorry, I know Shauna's just catching up and she's reading the question. I know we're at the mercy of technology here. And Candace is saying, unfortunately, Shauna's dealing with some just unstable connection tonight. Yeah, I think she's still reading. No. Shauna, are you able to see Jonathan's question? Yes, I am. Are you able to respond, or would you like to respond in the chat? I'll give it a try. Oh, hopefully I don't freeze too much. Okay, the National Deaf Indigenous Group will have a website. We are working on the website. On that website, you will see a number of resources. We'll have a Q&A section on that website. And for example, the questions that have been posed tonight, we'll be able to delve further into that on the website. And we're hopeful that we get the website up and running before December. But for the time being, there is a lot of information that you can access online. The NWAC, the National Women's Association, what is it? Indigenous Women's Association of Canada. Native Women's Association of Canada, right? NWAC. From Candace. Yeah, I can add to that as well. Because of the pandemic, there hasn't been a lot of activity across the country. But this is the year that we're really getting back to power and back to our celebrations. This is the year of rebuilding. So we're hopeful that next year we can actually host events where we can attend. And as was mentioned from Shauna, we are creating this website. We'll post events as they are up and coming. And you can follow us on our Facebook page as well, where you'll see announcements and updates on things to come. From Paula, great. Sorry, what's the Facebook group called? Paula, I just want to continue on with Deaf Indigenous Canada, DIC. The information hasn't been released just yet. You can find the information through CAD until the information is ready to be released soon. So keep an eye out over the next couple of months. We're working with volunteers who are willing to give their time to this. So just until we are ready to get the information out, but just follow us at CAD and DYC. Okay. Next question. It's the anonymous question. Native Women's Association of Canada states that the plan lacks specific actions as well as financial commitments for the families of the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. We need to include monitoring and reporting plans to ensure that Indigenous deaf women and girls be incorporated in the national plan reporting. Mm-hmm. Okay, now on to the, there was another individual, I'm sorry, I misanswered your question. It's DIC will be creating that website. Sorry, I didn't respond to that. I think that was Genevieve, right? Yes, yes. So DIC is creating that website, which will be coming out soon. I just want to go back to the chat to see if I missed anything. Yes, there's a number of things. Destiny is talking about following the structure of the system and the connection with God. with First Nations individuals, they have only one creator, but there are no, you don't have to go through the official levels to get to say the creator, right? Not like you would in other religious systems. It's all created equal. First Nations women have always been held in high regard in the past, but unfortunately it's become more of a patriarchal society where chiefs rule, and First Nations women were the chiefs. The chiefs have been held by men, but the Indigenous women have fought to become chiefs. And it's been far more recent, actually, that very recent comment about AFN. There's a new female leader for AFN, so that's cause for celebration. We're finally seeing more women in these leadership roles. Unfortunately, I can't remember her name. And then another comment says, healthcare abuse often happens, and Indigenous people are asking for medical help, but they're not believed. It's understood that they're faking their complaints about pain in search for drugs. There are terrible attitudes of oppression, primarily from white individuals, Caucasian individuals. And unfortunately, there's bad attitudes, and without realizing it, it's up to us to change how we think, talk, and act. Yes, thank you. Oh, I agree, from Candace. Another person mentioned, yes, education is the key. We need to make sure that we educate and take care of our First Nations girls and women. But it's Métis, Inuit, and First Nations that are all recognized. And I think it's important that we do mention all of them. Yes. We need to educate them to be strong and to stand up. Sorry, just going through the comments here. Another person says, thank you very much for sharing the resources. We hope there's more opportunities to learn. And we need more of these education and awareness opportunities. Again, thank you, Miigwech. Thank you to everyone. Candace, I thought Daniel had a question. Yes, if you would like to come on and pose your question.
Hi again. No, go ahead, Daniel. You're on. Okay, I don't want to take too much of the floor, but I have been thinking, and it's been on my mind, with the Indigenous children that have gone missing, and the number keeps going up to thousands now. And I just wonder, like, out the children. And so, I look for information, but I don't know if I'm finding the right information. So, when people talk about it, are they getting the facts straight? Like, I want to know. It's hard to see what's really going on. So that's really been bothering me a lot. And I'm trying to investigate this myself, but it's been very hard. Paula, I'll respond to that, Daniel. You had actually texted that question to me prior to this, and so it is very concerning. Where is the source of this information? And that's such an important question. When you find something local, it goes out, but are the facts conveyed in an accurate way? We don't always know that. So it's important to find your information from the right place. And sometimes the information is broadcast and names are put out, but sometimes it's a very long process before they can actually show information to the public. So there are a lot more schools where bodies are buried, and they are finding more and more, and they have to investigate. And one thing you can do is look in the library. A lot of things are not going to be in the library, but they are looking. It's a long process, but they are looking into the details to try and share information with us. Thank you, Daniel. Yeah, you have to look at too, who's making those reports, who's writing them, who's the journalist, who's conveying that message, who's looking for facts, you know, who's looking for stories. And that's really important. Think about it. If native sources are not being regarded as valid, then that's a problem. So we have to get our hands dirty and look for information. We have to be the story carriers and tell people the truth. And that's what we're doing. You know, we're trying to convey the truth. So you can share what you've learned today, Daniel, you know, and what you've learned in other places. Share it with people, and that's how the truth gets out. That's how people learn the truth, by sharing what you've learned, not by keeping quiet, but by learning, getting your information from the right source, and then sharing it. And I know it can be difficult sometimes. And media, I mean, there's good and bad about media, but the biggest news are, you know, about babies and children, and that's why this has become a highlighted story. Yeah, but it's up and down, isn't it? Yeah, and so, you know, from a personal perspective, I think it's important for you to get your information from the right people, the right person, do a bit of your own fact finding, and yeah, that's what you have to do. Thank you, I appreciate that. No problem, no problem. Okay. Okay, well, I think there are no hands raised, so I'm going to just bring up another topic for consideration. So we talked about the red dress. NFB, National Film Board, is a famous filming company. And the reason I mention that is it's very interesting because we'll show you a clip soon, but the story of the red dress. So hang on a second, actually. There is a film which is made by a Métis person by the name of Maria Campbell, and she was looking for a cultural topic and identity, and a story about family and abuse, and the red dress came out of this out of her story, and it became very, very widespread. And the film is only about half an hour long, and it's about a girl named Kelly. Sorry, I'm going to go back a little bit. I misspoke. So there was a man by the name of Kelly, didn't have a treaty, didn't have hunting rights, struggled to live the traditional life, and he had a daughter, and her name was Teresa, and she really wanted a red dress from France, and she believed that red represented power. And so she wanted this red dress, and she went to her great-grandfather, and her great-grandfather gave her a red dress, and Teresa had left the area, and Kelly was with his daughter, and they had a huge disagreement, and she left. She believed that she couldn't go back to her own culture, and she was going to try to make it on her own. And so that red dress represents the power, a symbol of power of over 1,000, over 1,400 missing and murdered Indigenous women. So it's worth having a look. It's not captioned though, I'll tell you, but it is, there is some Indigenous language being used there, and it is a good description of the background of the red dress. Okay, here's the link to the film if you want. And there's a lot more reasons and a lot more films you can watch. National Film Board is a fantastic source of really touching stories. So right now, since there are no more hands raised, I'm just going to check the Q&A as well. Okay, there is one more comment from an anonymous attendee. It says, it would not be fair to the families to share publicly the names of those who were identified or found or suspected to be among the buried children. Families need their privacy. Yeah, and so that I understand the purpose of that that answer is because Daniel was asking about those missing children, and I think this is just to respond to Daniel. So thank you for that. No problem. I think that they're just sharing information. Okay, so no more hands up. I would like to put out another subject if there are not any more comments or questions. Candace is saying no, you go ahead. Okay, so just wait to see whether Shauna had anything. Okay. So we've already mentioned this topic, and I go into this topic cautiously. I was in a foster home and at an adopted home, and it wasn't until the murdered and missing Indigenous women and children came to light that I was definitely one who experienced abuse in the family and in foster care and in my adopted family. So I experienced that in 3 different settings. So if you have also experienced some of this type of abuse, and I'm sure some of us have, all 3 of your panelists here have experienced abuse. So guaranteed there are more of us in this group. So just looking now, I want to ask the audience participants if anyone is a survivor or of abuse or involved in the project. You can just anonymously click hands up, raise hand feature, and you don't have to. I want to put anybody outside of your comfort zone, but I'm curious to see how many, just so that we can have an idea. So I don't see any hands clicked. I'm sorry about a little bit of distraction behind me. I'm going to just mute my camera for a second. Okay, I'm back. So I don't see any hands, and that's completely respected. My last comment, or sorry, any last comments from participants before we... If anybody has any questions or even wants to put out a topic for discussion, you have the floor. And we have the voice of the interpreters in the background as well. So. Okay. Candace, I can share a little something. Something a little bit personal about my own experience as a Native person. Growing up for me, my mother, I guess since I was about 3 or 4 years old, there was child and family services, took me out of the home, both me and my siblings as well. And, you know, one was quite young and we were, you know, a newborn baby, and we were taken out of our family home and placed and separated from each other as well. Our siblings were not kept together. We were placed in different homes. And looking back, what I realized is that white families, like, I did not use sign language when I was a child. I only used spoken oral language. I was hard of hearing, and I used my speech before I was experienced abuse. Then when my brother was born deaf, he didn't know sign language at all as well. So we had our own little homemade family signs between us. And he went to a school for the deaf and learned sign language a little bit later in his life. But before the abuse, I was able to speak with my oral skills. But after the abuse, I could not speak at all. I could not speak. I could not express myself through speech at all. I cried. I couldn't cry. I couldn't smile. I was just quiet and unemotional for years, until from about age 4 till, I don't know, about 17, when I finally spoke. And I spoke the word dad. And during those years, I was in many, many different family homes, experienced a lot of abuse. And it didn't matter what kind of race or color the person's skin was. I just did not experience or want love. I didn't embrace love. And often as a teenager, it's hard to see, but if you can see my hand, it's brown on the top and kind of whiter on the bottom. My foster parents often would say, "You're dirty, go wash your hands." And I tried to wash the brownness off my hands. Sometimes I washed for 30 minutes to an hour, and my brownness did not go away. I couldn't wash it off as much as I tried. But I kept thinking, I'm dirty, I'm dirty. And it wasn't until I was a teenager, I became very, very angry because I didn't have an identity of my own. I kept changing my identity depending on what home I lived in. And at the age of 18, I made the decision to travel. And so I was one of those hitchhikers. And I was only 18 years old. It's like these days, an 18-year-old leaving home would be unbelievable. I left home at 18, traveled with my thumb, and it was during, you know, I could have died. I could have died. It was during the time of missing and murdered Indigenous women. I could have been one of those taken, murdered. I escaped with my life at such a young age. I was young, I was deaf. I didn't have a cell phone at that time. And you know, I only had $100 in my hand, you know, and that's all I had for life. And I traveled, and, you know, I decided to take a psychology class and learn who I was. And later that I did some really solid reflection and started to form my identity as a Native person, learn about that. And like, that motivated me to come back home here to my area and really dig into it and try to help as many deaf, Native, or Indigenous people as I could. And I do. I want to help people find their identity, find out who they're from, who they are, where they're from, and do the research. And that's my motivation. So now my experience with white people has not been great, but now as I am a little bit older, I am much more confident in saying, stop, that's not right, and try to teach people the right way, the truth. And sometimes I do it right, sometimes I don't want to even bother, but that's who I am now. And I just feel excited and good about teaching people more and sharing more of the truth and partnering with people and not being hated, not perpetuating hate anymore. So I think this is just a great forum, and I really thank everybody for your participation and for learning together and sharing together and just participating and just showing up. So thank you.
Does anyone have any other questions or would like to share? I think we're getting a question here. It's Paul. Well, we have a question from Daniel. Is it okay that the Catholic Church was set on fire after the Indigenous children were found? Do you think that's okay or not? Yes, I think I know what you're talking about. So the story about the man who set the fire, he was a non-Indigenous person. He was pretending that he was Indigenous and he set the fire, but in fact he was non-Indigenous. So again, we have some bad apples and we have good apples, just like any other group of people. But as Indigenous people, we don't believe in revenge. We believe in giving forgiveness because we know who we are and what our role is and our beliefs and culture. We already know who we are. Those who are angry, who are committed to doing revenge, don't have that identity and don't have love for others and are bitter and angry. So we become more merciful and give forgiveness. But that man who set the fire made a mistake. He should not have done that. And yes, sorry, my hair's in my face. We do hate the Catholic Church, and that might be a fact, but we don't encourage revenge. If other people have different religious beliefs, that's okay. Some Indigenous people want to commit revenge, but everybody's journey is not the same. I hope that answers your question. Paula, did you have something you wanted to share? No. Okay, I think we had a second question. Nope, you can go ahead. It's from Genevieve. I love that name. And she says, do you feel that there is progress with support for deaf Indigenous and hearing Indigenous causes in Canadian society? I would like to say yes, but I would say not 100%. Paula, did you want to add something? Well, I'm having some technical issues. I think things are progressing. It depends on where you're located. Sometimes there are Indigenous events that I've attended and I've seen MPs, MPPs there. I've seen chiefs attend, and that's initiating the conversation. In some communities, they may not have reached out yet, and I would encourage that you reach out to an Indigenous person. You may find that you do have connections and you can build relationships with them. Here in Ottawa, we have A7G, Assembly for 7 Generations. And it's a youth organization and they're very active. They offer different programs, leadership, and they go to different regions to teach, how to grow medicine, build camps and so on. And it's quite interesting what they offer. So I've been making connections with them. And I would encourage that you work with different organizations like that. And that's how you initiate that reconciliation. Attend a powwow, go to a conference, talk to someone Indigenous, and maybe that can start the process rather than just going to deaf organizations. Sometimes deaf organizations don't know how to make that connection with the Indigenous community and they struggle with that. It's important to build that trust, and the Indigenous way of doing that is to engage in person, develop those ties. It's important to have those community conversations. Candace here, I'd like to add something. I can only speak for my community here in Winnipeg. We have a Manitoba Deaf Association here. We have an Indigenous group that's part of that, and we do have conversation with a hearing Indigenous person, Wab Canoe. I think he's with the Democratic Party. He's the leader for the Democratic Party, and he's against Indigenous racism, and we've partnered with him. We hope that eventually he could become the next prime minister. We'd love to see that. But we do work with him, and he's been very supportive of the deaf community. It's been a fantastic relationship. So if he becomes prime minister, we would see a lot more advances for the Indigenous community. So that's something that I want to let you know, that we are developing this relationship with him. And we're very excited by that. And we have an additional question. And it says, how do you feel that Canadian society is paying more attention to issues? Do you hope this time there's going to be change? Candace, yeah, I believe so. My fire is burning, it's raging, but with love. I am so motivated right now to see things change. I'm loud and I'm screaming for help. I have that fire burning. And I've seen even our American friends, our American counterparts, they are reaching out and saying that they're so sorry for those lost Indigenous children and their bodies being found. So people around the world are hearing about this. We've heard people from Europe, from Asia, from the Middle East that are hearing about this story. It's making international news. It's very different than how things were 20 years ago. I think we'd barely be a byline or even be mentioned. I'd even experience embarrassment, you know, that I was Indigenous. I try to pass myself off as Asian or just white. And now I can be proud. There's a huge changes. With people being here and asking questions, that's a change because we didn't experience this in the past. Non-Indigenous people weren't interested in asking us how they can be allies, how they can be involved. I do see changes. I think we have another comment to add to that. MFNERC, Manitoba First Nations Educational Resource Center, will soon release many First Nation stories translated into ASL. One of them is Go Show the World by Wob Canoe. That's the NDP leader in Manitoba. That's wonderful. I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, that's neat. That's exciting. So yes, it's a good start. We have CAD that's establishing our committee. We have the Deaf Youth Canada and that I'm the representative of. Right now, we don't have a lot of resources, so it's challenging. With Deaf Youth Canada, we already have a committee and we're working together right now. We'd like to see more representation. Once we get the resources, we want to see more people be invited in, and we're hoping to see the numbers grow. With the Deaf Indigenous Committee, you know, we could set up other subcommittees, like something related to Indigenous residential school, and we could just grow things from here. We have lots of ideas. We can only dream for more. I'm not sure, we have a question here who says, I'm not sure who Wob Canoe is. So there's a link right there. You can look up and see who he is. Thank you for sharing that. We have about 15 participants this evening. That's a good number. I'm hoping that we see not only individuals, but organizations and their representatives join and participate, because we need to get the word out. And please let others know that we're hosting these events. You know, oftentimes it's deaf organizations that we talk about and we say that they need to improve and become more accessible, but we need to see Indigenous organizations do better as well. It's important to set the stage right now for the future. So we need to see more access across Canada. We'd like to see more engagement. And we have a further comment from Daniel. And Genevieve says, that's awesome. We have to keep it up. She's right. You know, it's just been a year and we have a lot of things to look forward to. And to Daniel's comment, what do you think and do you know about the elections for September 20th, 2020 and what impact it will have? Not 2020, it would be 2021, and what impact it would have on Indigenous Canadians. I don't think we'll be discussing, you know, the elections this evening. I think it's important to use your instinct to know how it will affect. I don't think we'll discuss the election tonight. Oh, that's right. Everyone has their opinion and their preferences. So we won't engage that question this evening. Do you have any further questions? Shauna, did you have something you'd like to add? I think we've done pretty good. I wouldn't say everything, but I think we've had a lot of questions. We've touched on a lot of topics. Just that in and of itself is good. So I hope people continue to look out for other Indigenous events that we'll be hosting, because we definitely will be putting on more. We'll be hosting workshops and so on. Candace, the one thing is to remember is that we're a relatively new group. We don't have a website. We don't have a lot of information. We just started in May and June. So it's important if people are talking about us, let them know that we're relatively new. We're just brand new and we are motivated. With our commitment, we're going to succeed. It's Paula. Oh yes, related to that. We would like to know what you yourselves as the audience, what would you like us to host? So we're here to listen to what you'd like to see us host. So we're going to take notes. We are interested in some ideas for future projects, if you don't mind sharing with us. Yeah, someone is mentioning Sarah Young Brown. She's an Young Brown Bear. She's American. And she's a great resource. And I definitely would recommend that you follow her on Facebook, on Instagram. Do you have any ideas what you would like the committee to take on? We were thinking of establishing a mental health circle. We could do this on a monthly basis. If this wouldn't be formal, this would be an informal discussion. We were thinking of setting something like that up if you were interested. Sorry, I'm just trying to see the comments. Someone is asking about ASL translated versions of ISL. I wanted to clarify something around Indigenous Sign Language. ISL is not an official language per se. So ASL and LSQ is an officially recognized language. When it comes to Indigenous Sign Languages, there are quite a few. It's not one particular language. There's Oneida, there is a Plains Indian Sign Language, there's Inuit Sign Language, there's Indigenous Sign Languages to the Métis. When you reference ISL, if you wanted to develop an app, you'd have to work with, for example, the Oneida. They already have resources and materials available there. But if you were from BC, you wouldn't use those signs because that's regional to the Oneida territory. So if you want to learn Plains Indian Sign Language because you're from that territory, it would be different. It's similar to the Indigenous spoken language. We have Cree, Mohawk, for example. Métis, I forget what it's called. Anyway, the indigenous sign, oh, there's Anishinaabe or Ojibwe. There's so many different spoken indigenous languages, and it's similar with the indigenous sign language. When you reference ISL, it's not one specific language. I just wanted to put that out there.
I also wanted to reference the term indigenous. Indigenous does not mean native. It's all encompassing. Native is just one, right? We have native, we have, South America. There's many different countries that have their own indigenous peoples. Sorry, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the sign for Australia have the Black Aboriginal natives of, as well. And those are considered the indigenous peoples. So when we speak to ISL, it's not one language, it's all encompassing. So I wouldn't even reference ISL because we have our own languages, right? You know, some indigenous people speak Spanish as their native language. So we need to be careful when referencing ISL. When you talk about First Nations people, as Paula said, we have our own languages. So I'm from the Ojibwe nation. We have our own spoken language, and some speak Cree, and so all the other different groups have their own spoken languages, and it's rare that natives know their signed language as well. So we don't use ISL per se. Maybe if we fast forward 50 years, and if we're teaching our children all these languages, then we'll see more of the sign languages and the emergence of that. But just please remember that Indigenous is an all-encompassing term, and we are focusing on First Nations, but who knows, you know, we may be inviting Spanish Indigenous persons and Australian Aboriginal persons, Aztec Deaf Indigenous people, Navajo. There's so many of us, and that's a goal that we have for the future, but we're really just focusing on our Canadian groups at this time. And from Paula, exactly, and we'd like to emphasize, right, ISL is not all encompassing for Canada, right? And I would like for the audience members to know and to understand, to practice these acknowledgements, right? You could say First Nations or Cree, you know, whatever you use for white, like Caucasian, but you can say Cree rather than calling me Indigenous, right? Because Indigenous is, there's an understanding that we're all the same, but I may be Cree and somebody else may be Cree, but you know, I'm from Saulteaux, I'm Saulteaux Cree, and so, right? Oh, I'm frozen.
I'm on. So yeah, so there's all the different Indigenous languages. We can't say that there is one. You're back. And you know, where are the Canadian Indigenous individuals? Well, this is us. We comprise the committee. This is we're representing. Right now it's Shauna, myself, and Paula. We are the committee, the three of us right now. So yeah, we're the beginning. Are you okay?
I'm just catching up on the messages now. I do see three powerful individuals who have brought forth your skill and your knowledge to share with children and youth and your stories. Bring your stories to the Canadian Deaf Women Conference in 2023. Yes, absolutely. Yes. And Frank has said Indigenous deaf films. Oh, yes. Just to let you know, there is a deaf individual who is working on a film production. So it's nice to see some representation out there in the community, and hopefully we can work with them moving forward. Daryl says Indigenous Cultural Festival. That would be great. I know we're a very small community in a very large country. If we could have an annual conference at the same time as other events, that would be really nice. Lenore says in BC, I've learned that the preferred term was First Peoples as a general category, but each nation or tribe had their own descriptors. Yes, yes, we used to say First People, and then we've changed to Indigenous. It's unclear. I'm frozen again.
So there are different iterations of the sign. In an international sign, it is First Peoples, similar to how you would sign that in international sign, but there are different modalities, different ways of signing the concept. Next comment, again, interested in Indigenous knowledge about nature. Absolutely, that is such an important topic. You know, different things like plants and water and trees, forests, moss even, you know, moss is really important to life. Imagine that. So yeah, I totally agree with that. Indigenous technical, yes. Technology conference, absolutely. Okay, so all deaf people are now doing vlogs and FaceTime, and you know, we have time for technology, but technology doesn't always work. But yes, for sure, we all have our devices. I don't think that's what they're talking about. Not everybody can even afford technology, but I think technology is a really good thing to put on the list for the future so that everybody has access, all children have access to technology. It's a very important topic for our future. Thank you. Good, Jen? Yep.
All workshops and teams, DIC members. I raise my hands and thanks to you for this awesome webinar, and I must leave now with great respect. Bye. Thank you. Yes, from Candace, thank you. And Shauna, thank you. And a comment from Daniel. I clearly well know deaf Indigenous in Canada. There's not much, but I do like Sarah in the United States. Again, we're just starting. This is new for us. In June, this was our first time hosting an Indigenous Awareness Month. That has not happened. And our team took on this initiative, and you know, we're building. Next year, you know, we're hopeful to see it again, and we'll host it on an annual basis, and we'll see more familiar faces attending. In the US, they celebrate Indigenous Awareness Month in November. So we'll keep an eye on what they're doing, but we'll be doing ours in June. And from Candace, if I could just add to that, Daniel, as well. You've got to remember that Canada and the US are very different countries, right? Yes, we have Indigenous peoples, but we are so different. Sarah is very active, but think about how long it's taken her to get to where she is. It's taken years. I remember where she was an unknown name, and now she's well known, and I applaud her efforts. And if you know of her, then you share that information. And if you don't see that presence in Canada, there are a few of us that are doing things, but they haven't been active for a number of years. And so then, you know, that's been passed on to Shauna, and then I came on board, and so did Paula. So we are committed to taking action and not just talking the talk, but we're going to walk the walk too. And so again, just to emphasize, we're still new at this. I know you're talking about well-known individuals, but my goal is not those accolades. It's the work for you all. It's so that you understand Native culture and you have some awareness and understanding, and to show that respect. I'm not. It's not my goal to be well known. It's not something that I care about. And from Paula, right? I can't speak to all all Indigenous people, but and because I think that the interpreters are taking some time to catch up. So I'm sorry, I do need to slow it down. And I think the interpreters are switching now. From Candace. Daniel, again, I'm sorry that that we had to cut you off because I know we're very limited to time. With the timing, we only had the interpreters booked for 2 hours. We're grateful to the teams of LSQ and ASL interpreters. Thank you for your questions and from coming from a place of curiosity. So we will close with a prayer. I know Paula has a prayer prepared. I just need to share my screen. We'll just have the LSQ interpreter spotlighted. Just a moment here. Sorry, bear with me here. From Candace, I'm sorry for the technical issues. Ignore the background, please. Can you see it okay? And Candace is saying, I don't see the video shown. I'm sorry, are you not seeing the screen share of the video? I thought I saw a thumbs up, so I thought it was working. No, I'm sorry from Candace. Okay, let me just try to fix it again from Candace. I'm so grateful that Paula is just so well versed in technology. You know what? I'm just going to do it live here. Okay. I didn't have it memorized, so I'd rather just watch the video and share it live. Okay. To bless the whole world and the ground. Wow, it's hard. And thank you for letting us walk on this earth, trees, grass. Thank you. And hope to feed humans and non-humans. It's comfortable for us to walk. Water floating is very powerful and provides us human and non-human water to drink. We need water to allow nature to continue to grow. We feel strong and feel good. Forest is good for us to breathe the beautiful air. We thank you so much for providing us humans and non-humans homes. Homes are from our trees. Rainbow is strong and powerful, and the weather changes to match our needs. Whether we are humans or non-humans, spring, summer, fall, winter, continual cycles. If only in summer it would be more of a challenge. It's important to balance. It's worth it. Thank you to the sky, including the sun, providing us with warmth, breezy temperatures, good for plants to grow, important for plants and bugs to grow, the view of our beautiful mountains. We show respect and equality. They give us life to continue. Thank you. Thank you. And we remember, always look to the grass. It provides us life. It will, to keep it growing, it will change. Thank you. Thank you. Chi Miigwech. From Candace, thank you very much for that closing prayer. And Paula's saying, I'm sorry, I didn't see you, Candace. I just said thank you for that closing prayer. Okay, well, we're out of time. I thank you very much for watching today. From Candace, thank you for coming. You will see us again. Just wait for our upcoming announcement. From Paula, thank you. From Candace, good night. Shauna, thank you. And we're just scrolling through all the thank you messages here. Okay. So we'll be closing the seminar. Stay safe. Bye-bye.